This is Diana Shaw, the administrator of Women Are Human, and today I'm having a roundtable with Kara Dansky and Suzanne Verling.
Sure. Thanks so much for having us on. My name is Kara Dansky. I am the current president of the U.S. chapter of Women's Declaration International, and I recently published a book called The Abolition of Sex: How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls. And I'm so happy to be here with you both today.
Hello, I'm Suzanne Verling, and happy to be here with both of you, of course. And I focus on, and hopefully get it down on paper pretty soon, but I focus on the big picture and the monetization, how women today are being monetized. I always say a la carte by all of our different parts and pieces. I think it's pretty significant. There's historical precedents, and it's important that we're focused on it.
Let's talk about your book, Kara. What motivated you to start to write your book?
Early 2021, a publisher reached out to me and we had a conversation, and he was very interested in my take coming from the political left, as I do, and he was very interested in hearing more about a feminist critique of so-called gender identity, because he hadn't heard that before. Because as many of us know, and this is why it's so good that the Women Are Human website exists as a resource, the fact that there are feminists, including many lesbians, who are critiquing gender identity and its harms to women and girls is not really very well known in the public sphere. And he thought that I might be a good person to talk about that, in part because I do bring a leftist feminist critique of gender identity, and also because I tend to know what's happening in the US at all levels of government, including the legislature, the administration, and the judiciary. And he thought it would be a good idea to pull all of that together and to give everyone everywhere, but especially Americans who think of themselves as liberal, some help in sort of empowering themselves to speak about this topic with friends and family and with lawmakers, because there are so many people who either really don't understand what's going on, or they do understand what's going on, but they're afraid to speak out. Because as we all know, there is tremendous social pressure to stay quiet and not talk about how this is all impacting everyone, as you say, but especially women and girls. So I'm just going to have a little prop here. This is the book. It's called Abolition of Sex: How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls. It is available on Amazon, and for anyone who refuses to buy from Amazon for completely understandable reasons, it's also available at Barnes & Noble online.
Right.
Congratulations on your book, Kara.
Thank you, Suzanne.
So, what resources did you use to help you to write your book?
So it's so interesting because I've been doing work on protecting women and girls from the onslaught of gender identity for so long that a lot of it was either in my head or ready in a file on my laptop. So in a sense, I would say the book was already written before it was written,
Right.
because all the information was just hanging out either in my head or on my hard drive.
Right.
And so it was really a matter of pulling all that together and getting it on the page. I was able to write it very quickly, in part for that reason, because all this stuff, all this information was just sitting in my head, and it was a matter of pulling it all together and getting it on the page.
Right.
Well, I admire your getting down to business, because I think we were together at a conference, and then you just put your nose to the grindstone. Did you feel any discomfort at any point, fear of backlash, fear of the public abuse that a lot of incredibly awesome women have experienced. Quite frankly, when your book came out, I braced myself and I thought, boy, we're going to have to pull a posse together. I was worried about you, so worried about you, worried about us. So what are your thoughts on that? Did you have any apprehension, any fears, concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. One apprehension I had actually was that the publisher was going to pull it. Now, he couldn't have pulled it completely because we were under contract for all of the spring and summer of 2021. The revisions came back. He didn't tell me to use wrong sex pronouns. He actually wanted to make a few of my arguments stronger, including at one point in the introduction, I kind of described what the issue is generally. And he wanted me to say right up front in the introduction that gender identity is an assault on biology, which is language that I hadn't used. I was quite happy to use it when he suggested it. But so I was very glad that he did not at any point ask me to compromise. So that was good. I felt a little bit of apprehension because I'd never written a book before and I didn't really know what was going to happen. But I didn't really feel that much apprehension about the content of the book because I had already, I had already done a lot of public speaking on the topic. I had stood outside the Supreme Court to yell and scream my head off for women and girls. I had published a lot in the context of being on the board of Women's Liberation Front. So I didn't really worry that all of a sudden someone was going to come after me because I'm a TERF, because I already was. And, so much of this fight, we're embattled by the men on the left who hate us and think that we're public property to be chopped up and considered parts, as you said, Suzanne. And we are also so vilified. Often, those of us who have found it in ourselves to work with conservatives are often vilified by feminists on the left who don't want us to do that. And I understand why. And so we're already so embattled. I feel like there's nothing at this point anyone can do to me.
A lot of women believe in ideological purity, but the thing about it is that no one else really practices that. It's just marginalized and oppressed groups that are expected to never have allies and never collaborate on anything, even a single issue. And you stated that language matters in the pushback against gender identity question for Kara. And you suggested avoiding the use of terms like transgender as if this were a real phenomenon. So do you think that using pronouns to be nice and seem moderate and willing to compromise has led to some of the conditions we're faced with? Do you think we can combat that?
Yeah, I do absolutely think it makes it more difficult. And on the topic of being nice and using people's preferred names and pronouns, I mean, first of all, if someone has legally changed their name, then, I'll use their legally changed name because that's just their name. Right. For example, my mother has a very good friend who was, given her name at birth. This has nothing to do with gender identity. Right. It's just a fact. This woman was given her name at birth and she hated her name growing up. Mm-hmm. So when she turned 18, she legally changed her name. That's fine. So everyone started calling her new name. Okay. Right. So anyway, I will use legal names, but I won't use pronouns. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that I just don't think it's kind to lie. And the use of opposite sex pronouns is a lie. And I don't know what's kind about that. I think a lot of us feel like if a man wants to wear stereotypically feminine clothing and look in a stereotypically feminine way by doing things like having long hair and wearing makeup, okay, that's fine. But that doesn't mean I'm going to call him she, because I just think that that's wrong to do. And I have been really persuaded that the sort of socially compelled and sometimes employer compelled use of wrong sex pronouns has really numbed America to what's going on here. I think it's really confused a lot of people, and it requires us to sort of have a cognitive dissonance about what's going on. And I was talking with a guy yesterday, and he was telling me that he has a handful of friends who are transgender, and I could see as he was talking, he was like, "Are you telling me not to refer to my friend as she because she prefers that?" And he kind of stumbled over himself. And I think the reason that he stumbled over himself is because even though he wants to use she, her pronouns to refer to his male friend, something in his brain wouldn't quite let him do it. Because this guy that I was talking to, he knows that his friend is a guy. So even though he was trying to be nice by referring to his friend as her and she, he couldn't quite do it. His brain couldn't quite get there because he knows the truth.
Right.
So, and the last thing I'll say on that is, as you suggested, Diana, where do we draw the line? If we're going to call these guys she and her, then it doesn't make sense to me that we're going to call them she and her, but then keep them out of women's prisons. Because if these men truly are women, then they belong in the women's prison, logically. Exactly. But of course, we know that these men are not women.
Right. I think that if we are saying that we should use pronouns to be respectful, then we would have to expect the media to do the same. We're going to have to expect that the media is going to do it, the courts are going to do it, and yes, the prison system may as well do it too, because if it's about lying to respect the person's identity. So if the media never says that a certain person who is a rapist is a man, or a male person who identifies as a woman, and just calls him by his preferred name. And like I said, in some cases, not even the legal name is still male, but they are using the preferred female name anyway. So, for example, the men who got transferred into women's prisons, those were not their legal names. Those are still they still had male names, but then they used the female names on the documents because that's just the way the men preferred it. In the December post, then you were outlining the major efforts that were made in women's pushback against gender identity, including radical feminist advocacy and campaigning. You noted in one of your prior posts that U.S. mainstream and left media have refused to report leftist critique, including feminist critique, of gender identity ideology. So in the face of what you describe as a media blackout, what are some tactics you believe women can use to raise the public's awareness about the issue?
Well, I do think that there is a media blackout in most mainstream sort of left-leaning outlets.
Right.
I don't know how that will go on, or how long that will go on. So that's why, for example, a lot of us choose to take up conservative-leaning media platforms where we can get them. It's not because we particularly want to go on conservative media. Right. It's more that women have a message to share. You know, women who are really profoundly upset at what our society is doing to women and girls' spaces, and what society is doing to women and girls' existence as a coherent category. We have to take our media outlets where, if that means talking to conservative-leaning media, that's fine. It also turns out to be helpful to talk with conservative-leaning media, because as appalled as I am at what the left is doing on the topic of gender identity, the right isn't doing enough to stand up. Right. And so the only outlets that will platform me are conservative. Not only will I take those platforms, but I will also use them to encourage conservatives to do more in the fight to push back against gender identity.
So what do you think makes conservatives not do more, although they feel that they don't agree with gender identity, they don't believe it's real, and and a lot of them seem to believe that it's damaging to society? Why do you think that they choose not to do more right now?
I think that for a long time, and to some extent still today, conservatives thought that this whole issue is just kind of a weird issue over here on the left.
Right.
That, I think that they didn't think it was going to affect them. And I think that they really, really did not understand the long-term consequences of our society allowing the word sex to be completely redefined out of existence. I think that for a long time, they just didn't get it. And I think that also a lot of conservatives are very confused about what's going on here. In the sense that they think that trans is some sort of special kind of gay. They think
Yes.
that is because the movement was so successful. Hi, Suzanne. Glad you're back. The movement
Unmute.
was so successful in attaching the T and the Q to the LGB. So of
Right.
course conservatives are confused. Of course they think it's some special kind of gay. And I think a lot of conservatives just don't understand what's really going on here. And then I think Suzanne, she was asking me why I think conservatives don't do more to push back. And I was saying I think a lot of conservatives think this is just like a weird issue over here. And I think a lot of conservatives are genuinely confused about what this is about. And then I think that there's some fear because conservatives, in my view, rightly got a lot of backlash when they were so strongly opposed to same-sex marriage and to marriage equality. I think conservatives were on the losing side. Obviously, they lost, but I think they were on the morally wrong side of that issue. And so I think they're a little bit shy about taking more of a stand on this, precisely because they think that T is some sort of super special kind of gay.
Yes, a lot of people seem to think that most males who identify as trans or female who identify as men, that they are gays and lesbians. They don't seem to realize that in the case of men who identify as women, most of them are actually straight or bisexual. I think it was, I will have to check that again. I don't want to stick with the 61%, but I believe that it was something like that. I know it was the majority though. So what do you think
I
that?
think it's higher than that. I think it's much higher. I think it's something like 70 to 80% of men who
Right.
claim to be women are straight.
What do you think will motivate conservatives to do more? Do you think that it's it would be something like their children transitioning, so-called?
Yeah, I think that would help a lot. I think as conservatives become more aware of what's being taught in schools, I think that will help motivate them to do more because this stuff is being taught at all levels of school, right?
Right.
Young children are being taught that anyone can be either a girl or a boy, depending on whatever they want. And most parents, and let's be real, across the political aisle, most parents don't want their children being taught that kind of nonsense.
Right.
Even
Yes.
Democrats who claim to support LGBTQ rights, they don't want their children being taught that any kid can be either a girl or a boy.
It is wonderful to start explaining, start connecting with with a variety of people. I would love to see us, Kara, I think that it would be wonderful, for you, not trying to add any more to your plate. You know what I've already told you. I think you're capable of, but I think that we need to start educating people, educating everybody from different facets of life to come together because people in education don't realize what's happening, and generally speaking, don't realize what's happening in prisons, don't realize what's happening in universities, don't realize how children are being groomed and families massaged into all of these, harsh procedures and so forth. We see sports and then some of us go, oh my goodness, but to get that big picture of how women and children are affected, I think is just critical. I'll just add that.
So you describe yourself as a diehard Democrat. So what is the next strategy you would recommend if the Democratic Party continues to ignore or silence women's voices on our rights and won't budge from its positions and policies on the issue?
Well, I am I am much less of a diehard Democrat today than I ever was. I honestly think the Democrats are going to lose in the midterms. I hear from Democrats every day online, in my email and in my social media, and Democrats are appalled. Rank and file Democrats are just appalled at what is going on, and that is true regardless of geographic area, regardless of racial background. There's so many Democrats who've just had it. So I think Democrats are really going to see a change in the midterms. And then, we'll see what happens in 2024. But I honestly think, based on what I hear from people who communicate with me about this, that if the Republican Party manages to put up almost anyone who is a vaguely decent human being, and I do not include our former, our most recent past president in that category, but if the Republican Party manages to put up anyone who's sort of a vaguely decent person, I think a ton of Democrats are voting Republican in 2024.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on that too.
Well, I think that the reason why a lot of people voted for Biden is because they didn't like Trump. So he was very divisive to a lot of people. Yeah, so I grew up in a home that was very staunchly Democrat. So I do understand that perspective. At some point, I began questioning a lot of the things I was taught to believe. The Democratic Party, my problem with them as a black woman is that they collect groups that are or can be marginalized or oppressed. I don't really think that they, for the most part, actually help us to rise out of that issue. There's strategies. You can improve schools, for example. There's so many things that you can do. You can encourage entrepreneurship, but I think a lot of the times it's that they encourage you to think of yourself as over here and the rest of society over here. Oh, don't vote for them because they are racist. So they portray the other side as a kind of boogie monster. Then they will collect a whole bunch of marginalized, oppressed groups, and then they will play them against each other. And I think it has been used to great effect in this movement. Because before it used to be, this is just like slavery, to manipulate other people into coming along with it, because you feel, if they are tying the logic of another civil rights movement to this new movement, then it will be like, if I don't support this new movement, then I can also lose my rights. So forced teaming, I guess the word would be. I don't believe in unconditional loyalty to a party, just like any other type of relationship. I think it has to be constantly worked for. So that's my opinion. I don't vote based on party loyalty. But I respect other people's different voting habits. And you, Suzanne?
I am done with party loyalty, and I think I've been that way for a very long time. I see how the Democrats, unfortunately, I hate to be so direct, but I just don't like how Black people's experiences, Black women, children, everybody is weaponized in some way and used as a human shield to put forth agendas.
Yes.
And
exactly.
Push, Black people out front to be grounded up in a meat grinder. And that has happened in this whole erasure and tearing down of women. And I can track it all the way back to the early 80s with HIV and crack babies and all of these things that were just so loud and so intense. And we're constantly in a state of being pushed, fear-based, be attached to the Democratic Party.
Right.
And I'm not going to be, I'm not afraid.
Trauma bonding, right? Trauma bonding?
What did you say?
Trauma bonding?
Trauma bonded.
Yes.
We're will move the needle. We're the lesser of two evils. And the manipulation and the use of Black people, African American people, historically, I view it as a form of racism, and I won't elect, because we're talking about Kara in her book, and really, talking about us women as a sex-based class, but to see the Democrats with no hesitation impact all these systems and get them on code like that, including the press, and to support women being raped in prisons.
Right.
Taxpayer dollars paying for females to be sexually assaulted, physically harmed in prison. Just that alone, but in every system, including our judicial system. It is, I always say it's shocking. Good Lord. But it is shocking. And to see our institutions just without hesitation cut women off. When you hear people say, "Oh, I don't want to use my pronouns," Kara's like real clear. She stated that it's more than that. Like, people would want to say, "Oh, you mean women? You mean?" No. Now our statistics are not counted properly. Data on domestic violence is not counted properly. Sociopaths and psychopaths that come into women's lives and harm women, now that data person is counted as a woman. These things are not okay. So it's just a multi-systemic strike.
So then, Kara, you said you were in Loudoun County protesting with parents late last year after the male student raped the girl in the girls' restroom at school. So you said that you hear from U.S. Democrats every day that they're disgusted with the party leadership because of its stance on gender identity. And you also noted that Biden failed to pass the Equality Act in 2021, which would have made gender identity a protected characteristic.
So I'm so glad you asked about the Equality Act, because you just mentioned the civil rights movement. So I've been saying that the Equality Act, which passed in the House, as you said, in 2021, and is currently before the Senate, it would redefine the word sex to include the words gender identity. And that's true. But it's even worse than that. And here's what I mean. And then I'm probably going to have to jump off pretty soon. The way that it would do that ought to be so disgusting to liberals all over America, specifically because the way it does it is it hijacks the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was enacted to end Jim Crow racial segregation and was one of, if not the defining victories of the civil rights movement. And, in part with respect to public accommodations, right? The point of it was to desegregate public accommodations. Right. And that's what it did. And that's great. And now what people are saying is that they want to redefine the public accommodation section of the 1964 Civil Rights Act to accommodate men who pretend to be women, which should be so deeply offensive to all of us for obvious reasons. But it also really ought to be so deeply offensive because it builds on the crowning victory of the civil rights movement. It's so disgusting.
Yes, I do believe that it puts everyone's rights at risk.
I think that it's a great time for us to understand that there's a big picture here. This is not pettiness. This is not a bunch of mean girls. This is very real. This is our sex-based class. We've been down this road before, and we're going to have to, redouble our efforts. Yeah, redouble our efforts and work together and push.
So do you have any final suggestions, Kara, about how you think that an everyday woman can get involved and what they can do? Men too, but, I know this affects women more, as I said.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the first thing that anyone can do is go to womensdeclaration.com. Sorry, that's womensdeclaration.com, and sign the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which has been signed by almost 30,000 people all over the world. You can do that whether you're a woman or a man. You can sign the Declaration. And if you are a U.S. woman and you want to get more actively involved, please go to womensdeclarationusa.com, and you can find a volunteer application form. Fill out the form, submit it. One of our volunteer coordinators will get back to you, figure out how you want to get involved, what are your skill sets, what are you passionate about, what do you like to do, how do you want to contribute, and we'll get you plugged in.
Okay. So
I love.
yes, so thank you, Kara, for participating. You too, Suzanne. Be sure to go out and purchase Kara's book, The Abolition of Sex.